Colleagues, friends, good evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to this very first session of our permanent workshop, Historia Ecclesiae et Religionis, in English. The workshop is organized by the Center for the Study of the History of Religion and Church History of the Institute of World History of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And today's event is our very first attempt to transcend the linguistic barrier that has been separating our local scholarly community from the international one. And we all hope that it goes smoothly. So today I'm happy to introduce to you, well, at least to those who don't know him, Professor Nikolaos Chrissidis from the State University of South Carolina, if my memory serves me right. So Professor Chrissidis is an old and beloved friend of our center, and he's been faithfully present at almost every single session of this workshop. And we are delighted to have him with us today, not as a regular participant, but as a speaker. And he is going to talk to us today on a very interesting topic, women from the Russian Empire in Jerusalem in the 19th, early 20th century. And it is my greatest honor and pleasure to give to you Professor Nikolaos Chrissidis. Professor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone in the center for inviting me. It is a great honor for me to be sharing my work with you today and get your feedback on a very sort of long term, which can be done longer term now because of the pandemic project on pilgrimage from the Russian Empire to Jerusalem. I very much appreciate your kind words, and I'm greatly honored to have so many colleagues and friends in the audience. I am going to speak in English, but I'm happy to entertain questions in Russian. As you will see, there is going to be a lot of Russian text on the slide as well. My talk is titled Heavenly Chancelleries and Administrative and Other Entrepreneurs, Women from the Russian Empire in Jerusalem in the 19th century and also in the 20th century. Now, I'm going to start with a very few general remarks. First of all, much of this is already known, so there isn't anything new here. Just a reminder. Women have constituted the absolute majority of pilgrims to the Holy Land from the Russian Empire in the period under consideration. Several tens or maybe even hundreds of them became permanent or semi-permanent pilgrims in various locations of Syria-Palestine. By focusing today on this latter group of sort of temporarily or semi-permanently resident pilgrims, what I'm trying to sort of examine is some specific cases of female experience of pilgrimage. And I also am trying to analyze how others viewed them, especially male administrators and diplomats, both Russian and Greek, clergymen and laymen, and how I think they tried to control them because they were fearful of independent female activity. So this is an overview of what you're going to be getting today. A few sort of remarks on Jerusalem itself in the late 19th and early 20th century. In terms of population, it's been estimated that it was between 20 and 30,000 people. Now, if you add to that between the 1880s and the 1910s, an average of 5,000 to 8,000 pilgrims from the Russian Empire, that means that between November and April each year, the female population of Jerusalem rose significantly. No matter, therefore, how we viewed it, the presence of women the presence of women is very important for us if we are to examine, investigate, understand pilgrimage from the Russian Empire to the Holy Land. Now, as a kind of first sort of introduction, shall we say, to how the women's presence was viewed there by people in positions of authority in the Russian sort of administrative machine, I'm going to sort of point out to two of these. One is a letter that the then sort of administrator of the consulate in Jerusalem, Yusufovich, sent to Ignatiev in 1874. So we are, shall we say, sort of in the sort of later half of the 19th century. And what he's writing to Ignatiev in Constantinople is the following. He says, our paklonici, our pilgrims, our female pilgrims, he doesn't speak about the male pilgrims. He does not think they are a problem. It's the women that are a problem. He says are divided into two groups, those who come, with the aim of praying, and those who come with the aim of doing business. And the second group, he says, is a poison in Palestine, but also in Russia. And it is a kind of caste, he's saying, a caste rather, which is being created through fake ideas about nabozhnost, in other words, about kind of, behaving properly according to religious rules. And these are people who have been unsuccessful in their life in the Russian Empire, and they just come over to Palestine to blow off some steam and sort of try their luck there. They are daughters of merchants. Some of them are sort of servants in houses or maids. They are widows that get a pension or not. But overall, what they are looking for, he says, are greater freedom to engage in trade by exploiting the religious feelings of the masses. As a result, he says, we have a problem, and this problem we need to solve it by simply expelling them from Jerusalem when their passports come to an end, because they behave in very reprehensible ways. What do? They basically act as agents of the Greek clergymen there, and they exploit our pilgrims. So, middle of the 1870s, consular official writes to the ambassador in Constantinople and says, we have a problem with women behaving freely in Jerusalem, and we have to do something about this. Some decades later, the very well-known Alexei Afanasyevich Dmitrievsky, who is a well-known scholar of liturgical literature, a historian of the church and of theology, and he was also, after a certain point, the secretary in the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society, he delivered a speech which has been published repeatedly, in which he pretty much categorized the different types of pilgrims in Jerusalem, pilgrims from the Russian Empire. And he basically said what the slide tells you, that to his deepest regret, the most negative sort of type of pilgrim was a woman from the Russian Empire. And that was a big problem. So he literally asked, what is it that attracts the Russian women to Palestine? His answer was, they are looking for freedom. For them, pilgrimage is freedom. And he even went further than that, and he claimed that these Russian women had very little true religious conviction. Rather, they were there because they were facing some form of repression back home, either family, conjugal, or other repression. And so they were looking for freedom, and that was entirely problematic for him. Not only this, but he also claimed, and that's a regular kind of remark that appears again and again and again in both Russian and in Greek sources, that these women, in fact, were a very unstable factor in the Greek-Russian kind of conflict in the Holy Land for control of those shrines. Now, I call it here civil war myself. That's not my term. It's a term that I borrowed from a Greek researcher who has characterized this kind of conflict as a civil war. So for Dmitrievsky, the issue was control. We need to control these women, very much like for Yusufovich. What I see here, in other words, is about 50 years of concern repeated again and again and again about what women from the Russian Empire do in Jerusalem. And the concern comes from men who are in positions of authority. Now, this is interesting to me, and I've been thinking about what do we do with that? What does that tell us about pilgrimage from the Russian Empire, given the fact that women are the overwhelming sort of majority of the people who go there? How do we understand pilgrimage? And so I like to argue, or I would like to propose rather, and it remains to be seen if I'm going to prove it, that women played key roles in how pilgrimage unfolded, how people, both men and women, experienced pilgrimage, that in some ways they were an unlikely bridge in the civil war between Greeks and Russians, and the bridge that created, shall we say, both new ways of cooperation, but also reasons for anxiety on both sides. I also would like to emphasize that despite all the sort of male insecurity about women behaving freely in Jerusalem, these women were in fact very aware of what they wanted to do and how they wanted to experience their own pilgrimage. And so this is what I like to sort of propose here. The historiography so far that I've seen myself is very helpful. There has been in the last 30 years an enormous amount of work that has been done by a number of scholars in Russia that have uncovered a lot of sources, organized them, put them out there for us to use. So we are all very grateful for that. In this historiography, I'm seeing myself some trends that maybe we need to sort of sit down and think about what we could do better or differently from it. For example, in the case of women in particular, we have excellent sort of individual works that have been written by, for example, Rita Borisovna Butova or Kirill Vach has written about them and so on. But for Yelizaveta Fyodorovna, we have pretty much hagiographies, nothing more than that. And so it's not clear, it seems to me, what women on top sort of really were doing in some ways. As for the kind of historiography that I would like to, or the kind of shall we say, pathway that I would like the historiography to sort of go down now that we have this, shall we say, sort of ability, the plethora of sources, I would like to think that we ought to go towards a social and cultural history of pilgrimage and focus on the everyday experience of pilgrimage. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, after all this sort of extended introduction, are 4 cases which I selected randomly because this is what I have in terms of primary sources for them. I'm not claiming that they are representative of anything other than themselves. Okay, maybe they will become a category or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but so far I wouldn't go as far as claiming them. And one sort of one terminological issue here, when I'm talking about administrative prozhektery, I am sort of using here a term that Igor Fedyukin has introduced and used for the study of Peter the Great's sort of period. And so I find it very useful myself in some ways for my women in Jerusalem. So without further ado, here is the first case. This is the wife of the director of the Russkie Pastroiki, which is in essence the sort of Russian dormitory, right? The big Russian dormitory in Jerusalem, N.G. Hailov. For this lady, we hear a lot of contradictory sort of things, and I'm going to share some with you. But first, I should sort of point out a very interesting kind of element that comes out of a lot of the sources here. There are networks of women in Jerusalem through marriage, through friendship, or through common interests. One of these networks is apparently in the Russian dormitory itself, because the sister of Elena Maksimovna is married to the Greek accountant of the Russian sort of enterprise in Jerusalem. And apparently she may also be, the 2 ladies are relatives of the long-term, over sort of, I believe, 20 years agent of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society in Odessa, a guy by the name of Osipov. So here we have a very well-placed lady who has a position of authority, not so much formal, but informal in Jerusalem because of her marriage to the director of the Russian dormitory there and representative of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society. What do we hear about her? Well, what we hear about her is quite an interesting sort of series of things. Number one, she seems to have been very despotic. There is a letter by a female pilgrim who claims that in 1908, and that she in essence runs the place, and her husband does whatever she says. This is a very intriguing kind of piece of information there, which in some ways is corroborated by other information that we have, even if it not in all its details. What is interesting to me here, more so than maybe a kind of displeased former employee of hers may have said, is the fact that in 1902, I have a report from the sort of a guy by the name of Karaulov to Sergei Alexandrovich, who is the head of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society, who, among other things, after he's reviewing the Russian enterprise, he says, well, you know, what is interesting here is that Elena Maksimovna has set up a school in the Russian sort of dorm there for pilgrims, where men and especially women go to learn sort of to read and write. I even have actually tested some of them, he said, and they did pretty well. So for me, this is an intriguing window here, if you wish, a window into the experience of pilgrimage for illiterate women who go to Jerusalem on the initiative of a Russian woman of authority there. A second case that I would like to focus on is the sort of secretaries and various recommendatory that appear to be all over the place in Jerusalem and other parts of the Holy Land at the time. In order to understand this, I need to first tell you something. First of all, the Greek monasteries in Jerusalem are in essence not monasteries at the time. They literally have 1, 2, 3, it's uncle and nephews, basically hegumen, abbot and nephews, sort of Greek clergymen. And there are anywhere from 1 to 5, 6, sometimes 10 Russian women who are running the place in all its practicalities. So when we are talking here about secretaries and recommendatory, and as we shall see, there are some sort of open questions about them. What we are talking about is what the Russians would call Mirskie monastery, right? And actually one of the correspondents calls it that, in the sense that they are dorms, they are not monasteries. And in fact, they are run like a business. And Russian women are there really sort of involved in this effort. So what we have with these women is a number of pieces of information that tell us how important they were. For example, my favorite sort of one is a letter from 1902, which is full of apocalyptic imagery. I mean, if you've ever written or read rather the Old Testament, you know, in the New Testament, sort of it's written in a very testamentous way, so to speak. The ideas that are expressed in this are again male clergymen, right? That's what I mean by male clergymen, sort of writing about all the sort of intolerable stuff that women do in Jerusalem. What do they do? First of all, these women are agents of the Greek clergymen. Secondly, they write thousands and tens of thousands of letters, and they go back to the Russian Empire, and they come back and bring money to support these monasteries. Not only this, but when there are rituals in Jerusalem, this is, you know, the kind of, you know, how Orthodox clergymen are totally insecure when any woman does anything, you know, in their own poprish, right, in their own sort of, shall we say, area of expertise. In rituals, these women are, in fact, ahead in the hierarchy before men. And they even are involved in the Razрешительная служба, in other words, in the sort of liturgy of absolution that takes place. Not only this, and this is something that I've been wondering for a long time myself, and we've discussed this with Nadia Kizenko, who is in the audience here with us today. A lot of these women basically go around in Jerusalem advertising the confession services of their own duchovniacy. In other words, they are telling the pilgrims, come and confess, go to confession to my sort of clergyman, right? And I've been always wondering how this could happen since, you know, do you write it down? I mean, does the confessor know Russian? Is this woman who knows Russian presumably some Greek kind of an intermediary there in the confession, which would be really interesting? Or do we have, as I found out recently, one of these Greek hegumens, abbots, actually has made sure that his three nephews, whose career he is supporting in Jerusalem, know Russian. So that explains it. It's a family operation there, and the women are helping. So what's the problem there that we have with this category of women, if it is indeed a category? These women are freely offering their services, and they are impacting, if you wish, the experience of pilgrimage. In 1908, Anichkov to Stepanov, these are two officials of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society. I think that Stepanov was the, what is the French term for that? He was the adjutant to Sergei Alexandrovich until his death, and he actually was in the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society until the end. In 1908, Anichkov writes to Stepanov and says, I met the Tsar, I met Nikolaos II, and he's very concerned about the money that is being sent to Jerusalem from the Russian Empire. In 1906, that was 216,000 rubles. But he says that's only above the table. Podpolye, you know, under the table, basically, he says it's close to 400,000 rubles. So we're talking about a lot of money here. And Nitschkov says the first thing that we need to do is we need to unичтожить these tak nazyvaемые небесные канцелярии. You know, the heavenly chancelleries need to be destroyed, because otherwise, you know, we've lost the game. So there is concern. There is concern about the monetary aspect of the activity of these women, but there is also concern about women behaving badly and outside of their regular, right, sort of station in life there. What do the Greeks think about that? Well, it's quite interesting what the Greeks think about that. First of all, they think a lot about it. All the Greek consuls in Jerusalem are very aware, how could they not be, about what they call the fanatikas Rossidas economus, the fanatic Russian sort of household managers, economy, as we saw in a previous document, on Gemiotopos. The place is full of them, he says, and they are actually helping with the Russification of the clerics. The consul in 1901 sort of claims, through education and gifts. So for the Greeks, these are agents of the Russians. For the Russians, they are agents of the Greeks, which sort of makes me think if the women were doing something wrong, I mean, something very right here. In other words, they were doing what they wanted and living pilgrimage the way they wanted it. In fact, the consul here says that these Russian women are a golden yoke, a Chrissidis. I should actually sort of take a moment here and say, I keep using the term Russian, but I should probably sort of emphasize here that I have no idea what ethnically many of these women were. By the last name, I can tell that some of them were Ukrainian, some of them were Russian. You know, it sort of depends very much on the case, but I use the term Russian here. You understand, please, women from the Russian Empire. Now, there is further evidence about these women, and here I would like to sort of focus on one aspect of the official discourse about the Russian pilgrims, which sort of sees them as sort of as prastaki, as the Temni, Biezatvetni Lud, that's what Hitravol uses, calls them at some point, and which there is a lot of sort of social snobism there. And, you know, if something this project has taught me is that this whole Turner and Turner anthropological approach to pilgrimage, where pilgrimage sort of like equalizes everyone, is totally wrong. There is nothing further from the truth when you look at what's going on in Russian Palestine at the time. This guy Temnitskii is sort of one of the landowners from Belarus, and he spent 6 months in Egypt and Palestine, and he sort of came back and he wrote this report to the Odessa Gradonachalnik, to the chief of police, and pretty much he's sort of saying the same arguments we've seen so far. These women are dangerous, and they are actually really helping the Greeks, and they are conduits of money for the Holy Land from the Russian Empire. And here I would like to pose a question to the collective wisdom. The terms for these women are all over the place. Some of them are called gerondises, which would imply that they are nuns or crypto-nuns. Now, this is an issue that we will see in a moment. We'll come to that. Some of them are sort of lay women and secretaries. Some of them are maids. If all of these things are true, then how can all these Christianity be such prastaki when many women from this sort of mass of people, in fact, are so enterprising, they are so successful at what they are doing, and they are so helpful to the whole operation. I should tell you also that this is not just a report of a disgruntled clergyman. The report, as you can tell, was sent over to the Kievan Podolsky Volinsky General Gubernatory, right, for their take on things. So in other words, it is being sent to the guberni where most of the pilgrims, as far as we can tell, come from. Now, what about relations among these women themselves? You know, because I don't want you to think that everything was rosy among them. Here, a source that I was very excited to find, because it finally had both names and information, you know, about them, speaks of a Draka in the Fyodorovsky Monastery, one of the Jerusalem monasteries where, you know, pilgrims stayed. And so the story is actually sort of quite an interesting one. And if I understand it correctly, what basically happened here is the following. There is inevitably the Greek abbot. Inevitably, his nephew is involved here. Remember, the Orthodox Church in sort of at a certain sort of level is in fact a church of uncles and nephews in the Greek case, but the Russian case I'm not sure as of yet. This guy apparently has two concubines. They are called that, right? One of them is Greek and the other is Russian, and they are not in very good relations among themselves. So other women who have come to stay at the monastery as pilgrims apparently are caught in the web of animosities that are there, to the extent that there is a beating of one of these pilgrims by the abbot and his nephew. And the consul, the women complain to the consul complains to the patriarch of Jerusalem promises that the culprit will be punished and removed, but nothing happens at the end because the guy is making far too much money for the patriarchate, and so he is not going to be removed. So what we in essence have here is a kind of the microcosm of one of the Greek dormitories in Jerusalem, in which women play an enormous role. But we also have, as you can tell from the slide, the network of sort of networks of kinship, networks of acquaintance, networks of power that are there. The guy who supports the Greek abbot very much is Dr. Mazaraki, who is the Greek doctor of the Patriarch. For a time, he worked also in the Russian hospital there, whose wife is also Russian, by the way. Another one of these very sort of interesting figures at the time, as well as Aleksandra Dradisheva, who is a permanent fixture in Jerusalem at the time, at Varyanka, who apparently was very much in the radar of the Greek consul, I mean, of both the Greek consuls and the Russian consuls, but nobody could get her out of there to begin with. So now the question that sort of comes into the story is a whole unresearched, in my opinion, sort of topic of tiny postrig here. In other words, how many of these women that I call, or the sources call secretaries, are nuns who have formally taken vows, and how many of them were nuns back in the Russian Empire and came as nuns, and how many became nuns in Jerusalem? According to some sources, Greek clergymen had made an industry of this, you know, especially Metropolitan Meletios of Arabia, who was a Cypriot with the three nephews, did that. Kapustin, Antonin Kapustin, the very well-known head of the Russian mission in Jerusalem, sort of repeatedly referred to this topic, but it was something that was there before him. It was not particularly new at the time. He talks about the famous, at the time, case of Edvaryanka, who in essence you know, sort of was in an open relationship with one of the monks in Jerusalem, and who also had taken vows. So Kapustin says that most of these women have two names, and one of them for their lay personality, the other for their religious personality. The reason I'm putting the question mark here is because, and I would like the feedback of the collective here, you know, honestly, for me, for this second kind of group of women that I've been talking about, it would make a big difference for me if these are nuns, because then I would have to approach them differently, it seems to me. And so I've been looking for information on them. There is some stuff in St. Petersburg in Gia, but not very much that has been written about them. So the third question, the third sort of group that I see here myself, again, assuming that we can group them, comes from a very interesting collection of letters, which I saw in Moscow 2 years ago in the Ave Peari. And this is letters that sort of people from all walks of life sent to the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society, apparently in response to a call, what can we do better? How can we get more money? What are we doing well and what are we not doing well? In the first decade of the 20th century, it looks like there was a lot of soul searching, especially right before and right after Sergei Alexandrovich was blown to pieces, you know, about where the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society was going. As Pyotr Fedotov has emphasized, there was a lot of discussion about the schools and how they should be operating and so on. The case that I chose to present to you is from 1910. I even know where she's coming from, Silo Valuevo, right? And so this lady is writing to the head of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society, Yelizaveta Fyodorovna, who took over the directorship of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society after the death of Sergei Alexandrovich. She's writing, she's saying, at избитка святого религиозного чувства. So it's a very, what is interesting about this letter, it's a very self-confident letter. This is who I am, This is what I believe. It's my third time, she's saying, planning to go to Jerusalem, and I'm bringing bednie ljudi, poor people with me. So obviously she's carrying people with her, unless she, of course, is lying, right? And she says, by the way, I was thinking, do you have anything that I can do for you there? Do you have any parouchenia for me? For example, she says, the church that you guys have built over there in honor of Maria Alexandrova, this is the St. Mary Magdalene Church, is getting old and needs repair. I can tell you what to do. So the self-perception here and the self-confidence are palpable. And, you know, the sort of, even if she did not write the letter and she had someone else write the letter for her, which was, by the way, another one of these sort of functions that women had in Jerusalem. Many of the letters that were sent back, in fact, were written by pismavaditeli and secretaries, who are literally sort of writing the letters for you. So I see her myself here as a sort of representative of a number of women who are thinking about this project as the pilgrimage as a sort of a way of maybe sort of bringing like poor people over there, leading them, being a businesswoman, maybe, but certainly they actually have ideas about administrative projects and how you can, they share them with people in positions of authority. And the reason I'm saying this is sort of, this probably sort of was read further up the hierarchy, is because there is a little note there that says, send it to Alexei Afanassievich, you know, to read it. So they thought that this was important enough for it to go further upstairs. Finally, the other group that I wanted to talk to you about is, and this, here we come to networks of women of kinship and power and so on. We have quite a few Russian women who are married to locals there. One of the most famous, or by Kapustin's sort of, estimation, the most infamous is the wife of Dr. Mazarakis. And Kapustin considers her to be the stupidest and most ridiculous evil of the world. But this woman apparently was very instrumental in one case in sort of getting to other Russian women to evade the consul's sort of attempts to throw them out of Jerusalem. What was the story there? We are in the early 1870s, and the consul basically has to deal with the fallout from the sort of removal of Patriarch Kirill of the time, I think it was Kirill, who was pro-Russian. And what in essence he tries to do is he tries to sort of control all the women who live in Greek-run monasteries. And so two of these women resist. And they resist to the extent that the consul basically rounds all women up and tells them, you need to pack up and leave from Greek monasteries because they are our enemies. And what you need to do is either go back home or move to the Russian sort of run enterprise. And these two women, in fact, say, no, we're not going to do that. And instead, they use their contacts with Mazarakis' wife and Aleksandra Radisheva, and they submit a request to the local Ottoman Pasha to change their citizenship and become Ottoman citizens. And what you see here is basically their petition. In essence, they say, look, we came here, right? One of us years ago, the other one more recently. We came because we want to stay here and finish, up our life here. It's our right to do that, and we don't want to leave, and we don't want to lose our money. And who is the consul who is going to do that? So we would like to become Ottoman citizens. The consul, of course, literally almost had a stroke. You can tell by the way he's writing the letter. She's really upset because, number one, women disobey men. Two, these like women disobey constituted authority, the consul. And number three, the women are sort of going to the Greek side. So on all three counts, the consul is about ready to have an apoplectic udar, and until he sits down and he writes letter after letter, and he writes to the third section, and the third section really writes, Shuvalov himself writes back and says, tell him to relax. I mean, he doesn't quite use the term relax, but that's the sort of the gist of it. He says, two women changing their citizenship will not bring down the Russian Empire. Okay, that's not a big problem. My third section doesn't have anything to do with it. Take it away from me. I'm not in this. This is the kind of perfect storm. You have local power politics. You have the Russian-Greek rivalry, the Russians attempting to control their women and so on. But these sort of aspects of the storm really get resolved. How? But networks of local kinship in which women predominate. So, because I'm getting to about 40 minutes, it looks like, what are the conclusions here? What I tried to give you here is sort of selectively Vibratna, some of the sort of materials that I have seen over the time that I've been looking at this. Women are inescapable in Jerusalem. So I'm not the first one to say. Rita Borisovna, who is with us, has said that, you know, very openly in a very interesting article of hers, which says basically, you know, we need to sort of start thinking about, you know, the importance of women here, and here are some of these that Kapustin had to deal with. What I'm saying here with these examples is the following. First of all, I see women active agents and deciders on many occasions of what they want to do, on how they want to live the experience of pilgrimage. They are willing to antagonize constituted authority. They want to preserve certain autonomy. They carve out space, literal and metaphorical, for themselves. They are agents, they are intermediaries for particular individuals, for institutions, right? And who knows, for other sort of things as well. And it looks like they played many roles beyond the officially recognized ones. They upset hierarchies, and they were intermediaries there. What I also am finding myself is that they really know how to sort of, to their advantage, use, and I'm not going to say exploit, because if I say exploit, it would like appear to be sinister here. These women want to like live in Jerusalem, want to stay in Jerusalem, and so what they do is they use the rivalry between the Greeks and the Russians. You know, they are not towing the official line all the time, and it's not as if the Greeks think of them highly, but you know, they use the rivalry and they literally sort of formulate their own experience of pilgrimage, permanent pilgrimage, if we can call it that, the pilgrimage of others, the seasonal one. And so a few words at the time, for the end here. It seems to me that we have made enormous strides thanks to the work of scholars in Russia, and work that is now being done as well on the sort of looking at the external administrative structural sides of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society and of individual sort of deiately connected to it. What I think maybe would be now sort of the time to start doing is to go beyond the romance of pilgrimage and literally sort of going to pilgrimage warts and all. And I actually have been asking a number of Russians yesterday myself, how do you say warts and all in Russian? And And I think that we arrived at the point where we can say, совсеми особенностями, не совсем привлекательными, kind of thing. In other words, pilgrimage как и есть, принять и как и есть, right? Sort of as it was rather than as they wanted it to be. And it seems to me a window to that would be the women's experiences. They give us the gamut of pilgrimage, right? They give us the kind of a view of organized and unorganized individual group, the in-between pilgrimage kind of thing. I go on a trip and then I pass by somewhere, sort of visit a shrine, permanent pilgrimage, if we can call that. As I said earlier, the more I read about my Russians in Jerusalem, the more I'm doubting what anthropologists have written about its supposed equalization. And finally, it seems to me that the key maybe to looking at this would be the term control. And maybe what we need is a more internal sort of in-depth history of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society and some biographies really of its major activists. Thank you so very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to entertain any questions you may have. Thank you.
Right. Well, that was a fantastic presentation indeed. So thank you very much, Professor Chrissidis. Friends, we are moving closer to our Q&A session, which is going to take part, I presume, both in English and Russian, probably mostly in Russian, who knows. And to moderate the QA session, I'm inviting the driving force behind this workshop, Dr. Nadezhda Bilikova, without whom this workshop wouldn't be happening at all, dare I say. So please, if you would like to ask a question, raise your hand. That is, you can use this option provided by Zoom. When you're giving the floor, please introduce yourself and then ask your question. Try to keep the questions short. And here we go. So, Dr. Nadezhda Bilikova, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо большое, профессор Chrissidis, за интереснейшую презентацию. Я надеюсь, что ваши размышления не оставят нас, да, не останутся вне внимания слушателей. И я рада предоставить слово Алексею Бакатову.
1, 2, 3, меня слышно? Да.
Да.
Большое спасибо. Mr. Chrissidis, thank you for your report and presentation. Yes, I've got a special question about Russian pilgrims in the second part of 19th century. Have you got, do you know any foreign, un-Russian, not Russian leaks which mention and the mentions of Russian pilgrims and some kind of its specific senses. Sorry, my English isn't well. Some kind of specialities of Russian pilgrims, and maybe in dividing by men and women, and some kind of look of special look for number of women like pilgrims.
So you are asking me, so that I can understand the question, you are asking me if I have special numbers for them, or you are asking me about whether there is some kind of particular specialization that these women have?
No. My question about not Russian leaks, about Russian pilgrims in Holy Land.
I'm sorry, I may not hear you very well. А можно по-русски сказать, пожалуйста? Тогда.
Возможно, да, возможно, так будет проще. Знаете ли вы какие-либо не российские источники, упоминающие о русских паломниках в Святой Земле?
Ну, источники какие? Греческие какие? Поэтому я извиняюсь.
Да, я понял, спасибо. Извините. Значит, в первую очередь интересуют европейские и североамериканские свидетельства о русских паломниках. То есть,
там есть много, они опубликованные, там есть разные опубликованные, так скажем, itineraries, да, там разные там мемуары, у них есть много упоминаний о русских женщинах и мужчинах, пилигримов, но там специально о том, что они делают, я не нашел. Может быть, наши омские друзья и коллеги этим занимались. No? I know I have not found any particular myself reference. I have plenty of references to the Russians. For example, there's magnificent magnificent description by an Anglican bishop of how the Russians are dressed and how they butch make noise as they move. You know, they walk in the Holy Sepulchre. But there isn't particular kind of sort of discussion about them other than to say that they seem to be primarily uneducated, primarily dressed shabbily, and primarily making very long signs of the cross. But that doesn't tell us very much, because this is exactly what a Protestant of the time would actually say for anyone who did not behave in a Protestant manner. So in that sense, the sources that I've focused on myself were primarily the published sources that colleagues in Russia have put together, Nikolai Nikolaevich Lisavoy and people, you know, who worked with him in the last 30 years, who've done excellent work to put out these sources, and also the sort of consular sources that are still published, as well as sources from the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society's correspondence. So these were my sources there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Дорогие коллеги, будут ли еще вопросы?
Рита Борисовна,
Да. Да, здравствуйте.
Вас видеть. Спасибо за то,
Да,
что...
спасибо вам большое за совершенно замечательный доклад и очень хорошую презентацию. И всегда интересно услышать мнение, отличающееся от того, которое принято у нас в стране. И это для расширения наших горизонтов как минимум очень полезно. Вообще хочу сказать, что вот эта тема русских женщин-паломниц, она, конечно, крайне интересная, и, к сожалению, ею пока, по большому счету, по-настоящему никто не занимался. Хотя все, конечно, прекрасно понимают, что эта тема настолько обширная и неизведанная, и эта тема показывает, что проблемы, которые существовали в управлении русским делом на Ближнем Востоке, я имею в виду проблемы между русской духовной миссией, между консульством, потом, соответственно, православным палестинским обществом. Вот в отношении женщин они настолько показывают, и как вот эта проблема женщины, она находится как бы как в фокусе. И именно в этой проблеме мы видим вот все то, о чем вы говорили, что в начале 19 века ведь женщин было совсем, в общем количестве совсем мало, а после Крымской войны, когда русское управление, ну, скажем так, высшее управление решило вот эту стихию паломничества поставить на политические русла, никто, то есть рамки никто мне кажется, никто не представлял, насколько это вызовет огромную проблему, которая из сугубо дипломатической станет проблемой и религиозной, и ментальной, и всякой разной другой. И потом, через 50 лет, там вот в начале 20 века палестинскому обществу придется разгребать Авгиевы конюшни, и, конечно, оно с этим совершенно не справится. Но и вот вы упоминали несколько раз Антонина, и надо сказать, что да, через несколько месяцев после приезда, то есть он приехал в 65 году в Иерусалим, а в 66 году после вот этого паломнического сезона написал свои знаменитые пункты 1, 2, 3, где как минимум он просил записывать, хотя бы списки, хотя бы делать, ничего. То есть с 65-го до условно 1914 года ничего этого не произошло. Он предлагал ограничить возраст, потому что там, начиная с 35 лет тоже этого ничего не было сделано. И много раз действительно в попытках, в борьбе, в попытках закрытия миссии он говорил о том, что прежде чем закрывать миссию, вы бы навели порядок в, собственно, консульской работе. Это же была обычная консульская работа. И те действительно, тысячи, это... Скажем прямо, это после того, как палестинское общество действительно поездами и пароходами стало отправлять, и действительно, а так, в принципе, 1500–2000 человек можно было вполне ставить, как это сейчас у нас принято, на консульский учет. Ничего этого не делалось. И именно поэтому эти все перелетные птицы оставались, воевали между собой. Вы еще про Магдалину Эбер не упомянули, смотрительницу женского приюта, совершенно замечательная монахиня, которая так страдала на этих русских постройках, потому что эти женщины, она пыталась ввести, такую хотя бы элементы монашеской жизни, и там же драки были, это страшные вещи. Я уже не говорю о том, как эти русские женщины становились, как бы мы сейчас сказали, любимыми женщинами митрополитов, и насколько это было распространено. И вот мое изучение жизни и деятельности отца Антонина показало, что Антонин, когда уже понял, что он не может изменить ситуацию, он просто эту ситуацию использовал для себя, и благодаря вот этим любимым женщинам митрополитов ему удалось, например, осветить храм в Горней. Просто потому, что одна из таких любимых женщин ему помогла. Поэтому это сложная и тяжелая история с пребыванием русских женщин. Есть масса историй, как там одну ее высылали просто постоянно, несколько раз, вплоть до того, что один раз ее под конвоем довезли до Одессы, где она сбежала и вернулась обратно. Про бизнес, который пытались вести, привозя из России, там, я не знаю, сало, там какое-то вяленое мясо, и пытались организовывать магазины в Иерусалиме. То, что они были писалки или писалки, зазывалы в греческих монастырях, это да, это все было, и, к сожалению, русское консульство вместо того, чтобы как раз заниматься этими проблемами, не занималось, ведь совершенно только когда проблема была совсем уже явной, когда это выходило, скажем, за рамки, ну, или, скажем, просто каких-то уголовных дел, только тогда, а так, к сожалению, нет. И вот этот треугольник проблем МИДа, Синода и потом палестинского общества, он воспроизводился на протяжении десятилетий от одного консула к другому, от одного посла в Константинополе к другому. И потом, когда с 1889 года палестинское общество возглавило всю деятельность, оно получило себе весь этот ком проблем и ничего не могло сделать. Они могли только констатировать факт, что есть проблема 1, 2, 3, но сделано не было ничего. И самое главное, никогда не занимались. Для меня остается тайной, почему Михайлов, про которого вы тоже упоминали, почему Михайлов был таким царьком. Царек на Ближнем Востоке с охотой на львов в пустыне и тоже со своим штатом наложниц. Он же, и почему десятилетиями он сидел, а потом, когда в 910 году все его ужасные преступления фактически были наружу, то просто оказалось, что никто не обращал внимания. Какие-то знали о его проблемах, но как будто бы не было человека, которого бы заменили. И вот это тоже вопрос, почему руководство палестинского общества так спустя рукава относилось к своим представителям и никогда не пыталось навести вот порядок, высылать, контролировать. Ничего никогда не было сделано. Поэтому спасибо вам еще раз. Извините, что так долго, просто тема очень интересная для меня, поэтому спасибо вам большое за ваш доклад.
Давайте совместно мы пишем так, об этих тайных постригах, об всех этих женщинах. Вы знаете, они ничего не сделали. Вы констатируете, то, что вы говорите, это действительно это мое впечатление тоже, но они пробовали сделать что-то об этом, потому что все время говорят об этом. И поэтому, не знаю, кажется, что, по крайней мере, некоторые консулы как-то постарались что-то делать, но не удалось им. Еще о том, как палестинское общество относилось к Михайлову, мне кажется, что, конечно, вот это, там есть две сферы, кажется. Одна сфера – это круг Сергея Александровича и людей вокруг него, а другая – это сфера Ропита, Михайлов, Осипов, первые консулы. Все они связаны с Ропитом и с морским министерством. Правильно? Кажется, там после смерти Сергея Александровича вот что-то изменилось. Что именно, я не знаю. Но я думаю, что вы совершенно правы о том, что там есть там есть self-analysis, анализ, да, так скажем, проблем императорского православного палестинского общества секретарем Дмитриевским. Но это только после того, как Сергей Александрович умер. До этого, мне кажется, по крайней мере, Сергей Александрович и до его смерти Хитрово, все они как-то управляют. Поэтому не знаю. Посмотрим, что будет. Спасибо. Спасибо вам большое. Очень рад вас видеть.
Спасибо. Взаимно.
Спасибо. Спасибо большое. И, дорогие коллеги, я напоминаю вам определенную культуру общения в нашем чате. Здесь коллеги из разных городов и стран. И я прошу, во-первых, представляться, когда вы выступаете. Во-вторых, мы просим поднимать руку в чате. И слово предоставляю здесь я, как ведущая семинара. И сейчас я бы хотела предоставить слово профессору Надежде Киценко, профессору университета Олбани.
Спасибо, но я сейчас в Нью-Орлеанс, так что всех приветствую. Nikos, you raise a really fascinating issue of these women as agents, as somehow using their simultaneous insider-outsider position to push for things that they wouldn't have been able to accomplish. Let's say, I don't want to say that a man in their position wouldn't have been able to accomplish, but simply I would like you to push that a little bit further somehow. So just think out loud with that a little bit. And the second question is, you talk about Russian women, you talk about Greeks, you talk about women between the Russians and the Greeks. What about all of the Arabs? About all of the Arab Orthodox? I mean, how are they looking at all of this? Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Nadia, and I'm so jealous that you are in New Orleans. The insider, outsider, I like very much. Thank you. So I'm going to be using this with a reference to you, that they do have an outsider, insider status. I don't know if that makes them less kind of threatening to one or both sides. One side thinks of them as threatening, but as Rita Borisovna just reminded us, doesn't do very much about it to stop them. So are they able not to do it, or what is going on? Could a man do that? No, the answer is no, because the man would be immediately seen as, they wouldn't be able to put him in a category, it seems to be. And so a woman is much easier to manipulate, they think, but in reality, they are not, as we can tell. So to answer this, could a man do that? I do not think so. I'm always, I should say something here. If you look at the literature that is being published at the time in the Russian Empire about the Holy Land, it's enormous. I mean, our friends from Omsk, sort of have been looking at this. It's enormous. The Greeks, I've managed to track down about 7 accounts, 7 for 70 years, right? And so I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, the Greeks don't care about Jerusalem? What is going on? Anyway, that's another whole talk, but the only one that I want to relay here a story about Andreas Syncros. Andreas Syncros, for those of you who have been to Athens, the big avenue that you take from the center of Athens to go down to Piraeus is named after him. He was a Constantinople Greek, lots of money, goes to Jerusalem on pilgrimage. On the way back on the boat, he is talking to a Russian lady, and there is a huge kind of conflict and competition that is going on literally about who got the best deal in the Holy Land, the Russian woman or the Greek rich guy. And it's hilarious to be reading this. And he's very, very, I don't know why he thought that this was really worth writing it down until I arrived at the end of it, a page or two down, where he says, and by the way, I got the sort of pieces of the true cross, she didn't. And so there is an enormous amount of competition there that is going on between men and women, and the men really sort of see it as such, but I don't think that a man would be able to do the kind of job that they are doing. And that's something to think about. About the Arabs, the problem I'm having is I do not read Hebrew or Arabic myself, so I cannot read the sources about others. I mean, when I'm talking about women from the Russian Empire, a lot of Jewish women, for example, visited Jerusalem, right? Or to stay, to live there permanently, or to went back. I have the passports, for example, but I cannot sort of, I cannot approach those sources. So I don't know what they thought about it, the women themselves. The few Arab women that I've seen in my sources, one of them is the local Russian consul's lover, and so it's child out of wedlock that we have there that is actually adopted by the patriarch and sort of raised in the patriarchate. But other than that, I do not have information that I can share with you about the Arab women.
Да, пожалуйста.
Just a quick follow-up question. I wasn't actually asking about Arabic women. I was asking about because you were talking about this women's insider-outsider function as a way of being uniquely capable of mediating between Russians and Greeks, like those power circles as such. So my question was about the Arabs, not Arabic women, but about Russian women. Like, are the Arabs a power group? Are they a player, or is it really only limited to Russians and Greeks? I mean, in terms of ecclesiastical circles and everything else. That's all.
Now I understand what you're saying. Okay, sorry about that. Then the only times that I've seen them, the sources that I have sort of worked with, are when there are these kind of attempts in the late 19th, very late 19th and early 20th century for Arabs to gain more of say in what the patriarchate is doing and how it is run. As probably you are all aware, since the late 16th century, the patriarchate of Jerusalem is basically 200 Greeks lording it over thousands and hundreds of thousands of Arabs. I mean, it remains like that. The brotherhood is just, you know, a couple of hundred of Greeks and their nephews who basically lord it over the Arabs. And so it is then only that the Arabs appear, and in this case, they appear primarily in my sources as being the traders or the local sellers of goods to these women. So, for example, in a letter that, you know, I have from a disgruntled employee of the Russkie Pastroiki, these women are accused of making pilgrims go to Arab sellers as opposed to the Russian store. So they are side players, but I do not see them as having kind of, at least in my sources, you know, sort of very important roles. That doesn't mean that they were not there, but that's something that I should sort of look into. You're absolutely right. Thank you, Nadia. Say hello to everyone in New Orleans. I'm so jealous.
Спасибо большое. Вопрос хочет задать Михаил Шаповалов. Это Омский университет.
Здравствуйте. Николас, здравствуйте. Очень рад вас видеть. Замечательная презентация. Я в продолжение тоже хотел сначала спросить про арабские источники, но теперь спрашивать не буду, потому что действительно это очень интересно. Но спрошу про другое. Мне зацепила ваша мысль по поводу антропологического подхода, и я сразу, который неприменима к паломникам, и я сразу вспомнил работы Тернеров, которые как раз говорят о том, что на паломников, да, нужно смотреть не как на, нужно смотреть как на отдельную паломническую группу, в которой действительно все равны и где не существует страт. И я, пока вы говорили, тоже думал о том, что вот если посмотреть, как бы каждый о своем, я о своем русском городе, но вот если посмотреть на русские постройки как на город, на русский город, в котором сохраняются социальные страты, и здесь паломники, прибывая туда, соответственно, в русский город, они занимают вот те позиции, которые они занимают в любом русском городе провинциальном, соответственно, вот, где только возможно. Поэтому, может быть, здесь я тоже в процессе размышлений, может быть, происходит какое-то изменение статуса паломника. То есть вот они вот в одном статусе передвигаются по Святой Земле, в паломнических группах. И, возможно, здесь как раз вот эта вот социальная стратификация и отсутствует, как размышление. А в русском городе, когда они прибывают в некие точки, в некие локации, вот здесь срабатывает эта структура. И вот мой материал тоже, которым я работаю паломнически, он как раз показывает, что эта стратификация работает более чем. Вот это размышление, вопрос. Спасибо.
Это очень интересная тема, потому что, например, когда они приходят в святой гроб, там церковь, например, там есть разные там этажи, да, и как-то люди из разных классов по этажам там сидят, или когда идут ритуалы какие-то, там есть очень специальные особенные места для более важных, так скажем, людей. Что касается того, что вы говорите, это изменение статуса, действительно происходит это. Мои источники не говорят открыто об этом. Они не говорят, что это, например, крестьяне, которые это делают, почему крестьяне руководят там в ролях таких. Они говорят женщины. Поэтому всегда гендер там, по крайней мере, в моих источниках, это не социальное положение. Меня очень интересовало вот этот источник, в котором он говорит именно, вот этот Юсефович говорит, там, они дворовые люди, там, служанки, там, это интересно, это только консул об этом говорит. Значит, представитель русского правительства. А мои духовные отцы, например, для них это женщины, независимо от того, какой. Для них статус действительно все-таки, конечно, очень интересен, когда они говорят о том, как в разных там ритуалах и в разных службах, там женщины очень там ведут себя очень нехорошо, потому что они женщины, они не священники. Или... Поэтому, может быть, для них в подсознании там есть вот это изменение статуса, но в моих источниках пока я не видел. Но я буду иметь в виду. Спасибо вам большое. Спасибо.
Спасибо еще раз большое.
Спасибо большое. Тут я вижу... У Риты Борисовны поднята рука. У вас не включен микрофон, мы вас не слышим, к сожалению.
Да, извините. И еще раз к статусу. Мне кажется, что здесь проблема, которая не может решаться так однозначно. Потому что человек, когда приезжал в Иерусалим, он ведь даже ехал на пароходе с соблюдением статуса, поскольку он мог быть паломником первого класса, второго класса или третьего класса. Высаживаясь в Яффе, он, если у него были деньги, он ехал либо на этой немецкой карроце, либо он шел пешком в караване, либо нанимал ослика. Приезжая на русские постройки, он, соответственно, мог поселиться, да, гендерный подход, либо это было женское, либо это мужское подворье, но был точно так же и дворянский, отдельный дворянский приют. Потом, когда Марию Магдалину построили, там же был даже дом великого князя, специально для паломников совсем высокого уровня. И действительно вот это, и даже, кстати говоря, в храме гроба Господня были так называемые дипломатические балконы. Вот перед вкувуклей, вот эти справа и слева, то есть куда паломников высокого статуса отдельно поднимали. И даже когда паломники шли караванами, скорее всего, паломник при статусе, он не шел с общим караваном, он нанимал себе отдельного проводника и с этим отдельным. Поэтому вот вопрос со статусом это скорее вопрос такой, который еще его стоит обдумывать прям вот каждый раз и внося как бы очень много допущений. Потому что здесь вот так вот прямо, я бы, к сожалению, это... И был хотя один случай, приехал Павел Петрович Мельников, и это паломник 80-го года, очень известный петербургский сановник, и вот он приехал вообще без каких-либо наград, без каких-либо мундиров, вот он ощущал себя простым паломником, а не там паломником первого класса или там супер первого класса, поэтому мне кажется, что вот это очень интересный, конечно, вопрос, но боюсь, что вот прям прямого ответа мы, наверное, не получим.
Я могу к этому добавить что-то, можно?
Спасибо большое за реплику. У нас есть еще... вы хотите, Николаос, ответить?
Нет, это просто добавить. Это очень интересная тема. Действительно, например, тот самый Андреас Сигрос, о котором я говорил раньше, у которого было соревнование русской женщины о том, кто когда стал лучшим паломником в Иерусалиме. Тот самый, когда приехал в Иерусалим первый раз, он стучал по двери в патриархаты, они открыли, они сказали, кто вы, он показал там рекомендательную грамоту патриарха Константинопольского. Они на это смотрели, говорят, и все, стоп, идите отсюда. И его изгнали, и он ушел в гостиницу. 2 дня после этого он прислал им письмо от хаджиса, значит, от епитропа, от человека, который собирал деньги для патриархата в Иерусалиме. Когда они это видели, они все время как-то все изменили свое поведение. О, вы очень важный человек, пожалуйста, приходите к нам в президентский, там суита такое в гостинице, right? The presidential suite мы отдам. Поэтому статус действительно очень важен для всех паломников там. И греки особенно статус очень соблюдают. И сами паломники, и патриарх, и его окружение. Антропологи говорят, что как-то немножко теоретически они говорят, что паломники все равны. Это не так, совершенно не так. И Рита Борисовна совершенно права, когда говорит, с первого момента, когда путешествие, там статус с собой идет. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое. Вот. У нас тут терпеливо дожидается следующий участник семинара Ирина Смирнова. Только вы представьтесь, пожалуйста, нашим коллегам.
Добрый день, Ирина Смирнова, Центр истории религии и церкви Института российской истории. Я, к сожалению, не смогла в самом начале прослушать первую часть доклада, поэтому возьму вопрос, как бы это не звучал. Но вопрос такой. Знаем, какая сложная ситуация с паломниками была после Крымской войны. Об этом многие писали, наши депутаты писали, духовные. Известно. Мне хотелось бы спросить, есть ли какая-то информация из греческих источников? Встречал ли Никос, может быть, какие-то дневниковые записи? В общем, отражена ли сторона женского русского паломничества в греческих источниках, в греческой литературе?
Во-первых, греческая литература...
Алло, вы меня слышите? Меня слышно?
Греческая литература о том, как это паломничество происходило в то время в Иерусалим, вообще нет. Греки не занимаются этой тематикой. Есть очень мало вот этих мемуаров, как у нас есть в России очень мало, вот греческая пресса очень мало пишет об этом, путешественники очень мало об этом пишут и опубликуют в Греции. Поэтому опубликованных источников нет, а неопубликованных источников, те, с которыми я работал, у них вообще, кроме вот этих консульских рапортов, там вообще информация только о количестве женщин и о деньгах, и все. Вообще не говорят о том, как они ведут себя и что они делают там. Только консулы пока. А консулы, к сожалению, файлы греческого архива иностранных дел, так скажем, не очень организованы, совсем не организованы, как у нас в России, поэтому это очень трудно с ними работать. Но, по крайней мере, что касается тех, с которыми я работал, у них мало информации. Просто консулы в самом начале 20 века, они говорят более подробно, как я в одном слайде там говорил. А вот женщины, авторы таких мемуаров в России есть, некоторые из них в Греции вообще только в самом начале 20 века, и они переписывают одна другую. Поэтому вот такое состояние, так скажем, или такая ситуация с источниками греческими. Есть больше о том, как русские женщины были вокруг Атона, да, Афона, чем в Иерусалиме, надо сказать.
Интересно. Спасибо большое. Дорогие коллеги, есть ли у вас еще вопросы или Иван? Звук. Не слышно.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Nadezhda. I'm Ivan Fadeev, a senior research fellow at the Institute of World History of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Professor Chrissidis, you've just mentioned that the Greek scholars are not interested in the history of pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which I find, well, shall I put it mildly, fascinating. Could you, could you have a wild guess, or probably you know for sure why this is the case? Thank you.
I actually have more than a guess on that, because I have repeatedly and unsuccessfully tried to get people to become interested in it in Greece. The reason is connected to two important, I think, developments in Greece. Number one, what we call academic religious history in Greece is dominated by people associated with theological academies, most of whom are clergymen. Now, in principle, there is nothing wrong with being a clergyman and writing history. I'm not saying that there is anything wrong to that. It's just that for the Greek academic market, so to speak, this already attaches a particular kind of label to you. And so that is one particular sort of issue there. The second issue has to do with academic fashions. In Greece, religious history is not something that has entered the academic world, because most of the academic world viewed religion and the church, both the administrative, therefore, and the pious kind of aspects of it, as sort of supporting the state. So religion has become politicized together with the church. And so attempts, for example, that would sort of take the church and separate it as an institution from religion as practiced have not met with a lot of success. If I may just refer to a personal experience with it, a couple of years ago, I organized together with other people in Crete a conference on religion and the sea. In other words, I tried to basically have people work on lived religion and the sea. So I was thinking about getting people to tell me about how St. Nicholas appears in miracles of sailors, right? Or I was thinking about, you know, we have those like sailing churches in Russia, right? The Caspian, the churches that go from one place to the other, the St. Nicholas. I find these things fascinating myself, right? Nobody else does. So I don't think that there is this kind of interest there, precisely because the church is seen as, I mean, religious history is seen primarily as the poprish, the kind of like field for clergymen, and it is primarily political. I don't think that in my lifetime this is going to change, I'm afraid. Although I am trying to get them to work on confession, and I'm thinking of bringing Nadia Kizenko as a person. So this is in the works. I've been trying for the last sort of 6 months, nudging people to do something on confession. So we will see if that will be successful. I just gave away the secret, Nadia, to you too.
Well, the best of luck to you. I mean,
I will need it.
Yeah. And keep us updated as to the success of your endeavor.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening to me, putting aside time from your busy schedule to invite me and listen. And I спасибо всем за то, что вы провели время со мной об этой теме. И, пожалуйста, если есть какие-то заметки, предложения, скажите, пожалуйста, потому что сейчас в пандемии очень трудно, конечно. Я очень соскучился, я не могу туда у вас в архиве там сидеть. Вот эти письма императорскому православному палестинскому обществу, какие были, такой там eye-opener, да, это, там люди есть особенно одно письмо от крестьянина, который пишет он пишет диалектом там диалектом его района, да, и он, когда я очень тщательно и так очень осторожно и аккуратно списывал все его особенности речи. У меня есть вот это, и я это читаю, и это вообще это голос паломника, который говорит, что он жалуется о том, что в русской больнице не пропускают его, чтобы посетить его друга. И он говорит доктору, это не крепостное право. Вы знаете, это не крепостное право. Сообщаю, он говорит, не сообщаю, сообщаю. И он пишет Елизавете Федоровне, вы знаете, и он говорит, вы знаете, в следующий раз я буду в Москве, я к вам буду. Вы меня принимайте, пожалуйста. Это очень трогательно, надо сказать. Вот человек верующий, из простаков, но не из темных, совершенно не темный человек.
Спасибо большое. Вот такое погружение в повседневность выводит нас в новые измерения религиозности. И мне кажется, в вашем докладе самое интересное и инноваторское – это уход от институтов, от больших имперских массивов, от идеологии и борьбы за Ближний Восток и погружение именно в повседневность тех людей, которых действительно, с одной стороны, пытались инструментализовать, а с другой стороны, и видели в них только объекты. И попытки найти документы, дающие возможность услышать их голоса, голоса вот тех самых маленьких людей, которые оказываются при этом не просто акторами, да, а часто неудобными, непонимаемыми и лишними в этих комбинациях большой политики. И для меня совершенно очевидно, что женщины, про которых вы говорили, это как раз те лишние, неудобные и обычно просто маркируемые, да, как-то вот обозначаемые субъекты, собственно, внутренняя мотивация которых никого интересовала. И если вам удастся вытащить, да, хоть какие-то источники, проливающие свет про них, про их личные мотивы, про их судьбы, и, собственно, что ими двигало, как они себя презентовали и описывали свой религиозный опыт и свой опыт нахождения в Святой Земле, мне кажется, это будет действительно каким-то важным, прорывным мотивом, и я очень надеюсь, что вы сможете в ближайшее время и до архивов добраться. Если мы сможем как-то вам помочь, вы знаете, мы всегда будем рады. Спасибо огромное за такой антропологический ракурс. И я надеюсь, что в нашем центре в скором времени мы не уходим. Как-то тема Святой Земли и путешествия на нее, видимо, в условиях, когда передвижения у всех ограничены, и мы заперты в своих, да, локальностях. Вот эта привлекательность Святой Земли, видимо, она возрастает. И у нас следующее мероприятие в нашем центре как раз будет обсуждение презентации книги Михаила Шаповалова и его соавторов, часть из которых здесь с нами, о русской Палестине. Все, кто заинтересован, могут связаться с Михаилом и получить его книгу. И мы надеемся на то, что такой не менее презентабельный состав, который был у вас сегодня, мы все будем рады вашему участию в дискуссиях вокруг книги и обсуждению тех проблем, которые Михаилу и его коллективу удалось поднять в рамках их исследовательского проекта. И я еще раз благодарю всех тех, кто пришел к нам на наш семинар, в первую очередь профессора Chrissidisa за его прекрасный доклад. И я очень благодарна вам за то, что вы нашли время и выбрали подходящий для всех приемлемый режим, скажем так, для встречи. И ждем вас всех. Да, спасибо огромное отзывчивым слушателям внимательным. И я благодарю вас всех за такой наш, наверное, первый эксперимент двуязычного мероприятия. И я надеюсь, что он был успешным. И надеюсь, что мы будем и продолжать в таком формате работать иногда дальше. Спасибо вам большое. И мы, думаю, завершаем наше мероприятие.
Yes, but before we do that, Professor Chrissidis, thank you very much once more for your exciting, fascinating, very purposeful presentation. And may I ask you to consider writing a paper, an article on it for Novaya Innovatia Historia journal. We would be honored and happy and delighted, simply delighted to receive your manuscript.
Thank you.
Please consider the idea. Yes. So thank you very much, Professor Chrissidis. Thank you very much, colleagues. We are looking forward to seeing you again. at our upcoming events. And one of them is indeed a presentation of a very interesting book entitled, if my memory serves me right, Imagining Palestine, the Holy Land and Russian Identity in the 19th, early 21st centuries. So this monograph examines the concept of the, shall we say, the invention of the Holy Land in the common imagery of Russia. It pays particular attention to the history of perceptions of Jerusalem, the Holy Land, and the history of the concept of Russian Palestine. The authors investigate the influence of the Holy Land on the formation, confirmation, and presentation of Russian identity, and determine what role the pilgrimage tradition played in this in those processes. The study covers a broad chronological framework from the imperial to the Soviet and post-Soviet periods. The authors give special attention to Siberia and Belarus, two remote but unique multi-confessional regions where the problems of defining Russian identity were particularly, or shall I say, acutely felt. These regions had an identity of their own, and they required the transfer of both imagery and ideas associated with the Holy Land. To present the book, we're going to have two invited specialists, Professor Laura Gert from the St. Petersburg Institute of History of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and Professor Aleksandr Polunov from Moscow State University. And of course, we're going to have the editor-in-chief, Michael Shapovalov, and of course, some of the authors. So do consider coming and taking an active part in the presentation and the discussion that is going to, I'm sure, unfold after it. And thank you all very much. So do consider coming as speakers. If you would like to present your research, either in English or in Russian, we shall be delighted to hear you. So thank you all very much. To those of you who are on the other side of the pond, have a very lovely day, I suppose. And to all of you who are happen to be over here in Russia, a very lovely evening and a very good night. Thank you all very much. God bless. Goodbye.